The sky had been threatening all day, hanging low and gray like a wool blanket stretched too thin, but I'd been stubborn enough to believe the weather app's promise of partly cloudy with a chance of light rain. Light rain, what a joke. The storm that finally broke loose over downtown felt like the city's revenge for weeks of drought, torrential, angry, and utterly unforgiving. I was 3 blocks from my apartment when the first fat droplets started falling, and by the time I'd made it halfway down Fifth Street, the heavens had opened up completely. Rain came down in sheets so thick I could barely see the traffic lights, turning the familiar cityscape into a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The gutters had already surrendered, overflowing into the streets and creating impromptu rivers that soaked through my supposedly waterproof sneakers within seconds. My hair was plastered to my scalp, my button-down shirt clinging to my skin in ways that made me acutely aware of how unprepared I'd been for this biblical downpour. Water streamed down my face, blurring my vision and making me squint against the driving rain. Each step sent little splashes up the back of my legs, and I could feel my phone buzzing anxiously in my back pocket. Probably work emails that seemed infinitely less important now that I was drowning on dry land. The thunder started as I rounded the corner onto Madison, deep rumbling growls that seemed to shake the windows of the shops I passed. Lightning followed close behind, illuminating the chaos around me in stark, momentary flashes. People were running everywhere, newspapers held futilely over their heads, high heels abandoned in favor of barefoot sprints to the nearest shelter. A businessman in an expensive suit stood pressed against a building, looking like he'd been dunked in a swimming pool, his briefcase held protectively against his chest. I was scanning desperately for any kind of cover when I spotted the small corner shop up ahead. One of those narrow places squeezed between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop, the kind with a hand-painted sign and windows so cluttered with advertisements that you could barely see inside. More importantly, it had a deep doorway that promised at least temporary refuge from the storm that was quickly turning into something that felt personal. I made a break for it, my feet slipping slightly on the slick sidewalk as I dodged other refugees from the weather. The shop's entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people, with glass windows on either side that were already fogged from the temperature difference between the storm outside and whatever warmth waited within. A small bell chimed as I pushed through the door, and the sudden silence, relative silence anyway, since the rain was still hammering against the windows, felt like stepping into a church. The shop was cramped and warm, smelling of dust and old paper and something vaguely floral that might have been air freshener or might have been the owner's perfume. Shelves lined every available wall space, packed with an eclectic mix of convenience store staples, novelty items, and things that looked like they'd been sitting there since the Carter administration. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a slightly greenish glow that made my rain-soaked skin look pale and sickly. There were maybe half a dozen other people taking shelter, all of us dripping steadily onto the worn linoleum floor and creating little puddles that the shop owner, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, kept glancing at with the resigned expression of someone who'd been through this before. I wiped my face with my sleeve, trying to get the worst of the water out of my eyes. And that's when I saw it, a small display rack near the front counter, one of those spinning things that usually held postcards or keychains, but this one held umbrellas, cheap ones, the kind with plastic handles and fabric that probably wouldn't survive more than a few uses, but they looked like salvation to someone who was already soaked through and facing the prospect of another 3 blocks in weather that seemed determined to wash the entire city into the harbor. There was only one left. It was black, standard size, nothing fancy, the kind of umbrella you'd buy in desperation and then leave in the corner of your office for months afterward. But it was there, and I was here, and the alternative was spending the next 20 minutes getting even more thoroughly drenched while I waited for the storm to pass. I was already reaching for it, my fingers extended toward the curved plastic handle, when another hand appeared in my peripheral vision. The collision was gentle, just our fingertips brushing against each other as we both went for the same umbrella at exactly the same moment. But the contact sent a little jolt through me that had nothing to do with the static electricity building up outside. I looked up, following the line of that other arm, to find myself face to face with a stranger who looked about as bedraggled as I felt, but somehow managed to make it work. He was tall, maybe an inch or two taller than me, with dark hair that had been thoroughly defeated by the rain and was now hanging in damp waves across his forehead. His eyes were a warm brown, the color of coffee or good whiskey, and they widened slightly in surprise when our gazes met. He was wearing a gray sweater that had gone dark with moisture and jeans that looked like they'd taken the brunt of his dash through the storm. Like me, he was dripping steadily onto the floor, but unlike me, he seemed to find the whole situation more amusing than irritating. A nervous laugh escaped him, the kind of sound someone makes when they're caught off guard but not entirely displeased about it. "Guess we both had the same idea," he said, his voice carrying just a hint of an accent I couldn't quite place. Something that softened his consonants and made his words feel warmer than they should have, given that we were both standing there soaked and desperate. I realized I was still standing there with my hand extended toward the umbrella, our fingers still almost touching, and I pulled back slightly. "Looks like it's either you or me," I replied, trying for casual but probably landing somewhere closer to awkward. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, colored by my frustration with the weather and the situation and the way this stranger's presence had somehow complicated what should have been a simple transaction. He didn't move his hand away from the umbrella either, but he wasn't being aggressive about it. If anything, he looked genuinely conflicted, like he was running through the same mental calculations I was. How much did he really need this umbrella versus how much hassle was it worth to claim it? His gaze flicked from my face to the window where the rain was still coming down with the biblical intensity and then back to me. "This is probably going to sound crazy," he said. And that nervous laugh appeared again. "But what if we shared it? I mean, just until we get where we're going, assuming we're headed in the same direction?" Which he gestured vaguely toward the storm outside. "I don't know, maybe we're not, but it seems like a shame to fight over it when we're both clearly in the same boat here." The suggestion caught me off guard. In any other circumstance, the idea of sharing an umbrella with a complete stranger would have seemed absurd, impractical, probably unsafe. But standing there in that cramped shop, both of us dripping and desperate, it somehow made perfect sense. There was something about the way he'd suggested it, tentatively, like he half expected me to laugh at him, that made it impossible to say no. I'm heading toward the university district, I said, testing the waters. His face lit up. That's perfect. I'm going to Maple Street, right near campus. Maple Street was literally 2 blocks from my apartment. The coincidence felt too neat to be entirely accidental, like the storm had orchestrated this whole encounter for reasons I couldn't begin to guess at. All right, I heard myself saying. Let's do it. He smiled, really smiled this time, not just that nervous laugh, and it transformed his entire face. Great. I'm Alex, by the way. He extended his free hand, the one that wasn't still hovering near the umbrella. David, I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm despite the cold rain we'd both been standing in, and I found myself holding on for just a moment longer than strictly necessary. Alex purchased the umbrella from the shop owner, who watched our interaction with the kind of benevolent curiosity of someone who'd seen plenty of weather-related dramas play out in her store. The umbrella cost $12, which Alex paid for entirely, waving off my attempts to contribute half. Call it payment for the company, he said as we stood by the door, both of us staring out at the storm that didn't seem to be showing any signs of letting up. The rain was coming down in sheets so thick that the streetlights looked like smears of yellow paint against the gray afternoon. The wind had picked up too, sending leaves and bits of debris skittering down the sidewalk and making the storm feel alive, almost aggressive. Thunder rolled overhead in long, continuous growls, and every few seconds lightning would illuminate the whole scene in sharp black and white, like photographs being taken by some cosmic camera. Ready? Alex asked, popping open the umbrella. It was smaller than it had looked in the rack, definitely designed for 1 person, maybe 2 if they didn't mind being very close together. I nodded, and we stepped out into the storm. The first thing I noticed was how inadequate the umbrella really was. It covered our heads and shoulders barely, but the rain was coming at such an angle that staying completely dry was going to be impossible. The second thing I noticed was how close Alex and I had to stand to both fit under its meager protection. Our shoulders were pressed together, and I could feel the warmth of his body even through our wet clothes. We started walking, trying to find a rhythm that would keep us both reasonably sheltered. It was awkward at first. Alex was holding the umbrella with his right hand. I was on his left side, and we kept bumping into each other as we navigated the flooded sidewalk. The umbrella itself seemed determined to catch every gust of wind, tugging at Alex's grip and threatening to turn itself inside out every few steps. Sorry, Alex muttered after we collided for the 3rd time in as many blocks, his elbow knocking against my ribs as he struggled to keep the umbrella steady. It's fine, I said, though I was acutely aware of every point where our bodies made contact. His shoulder against mine, solid and reassuring. The occasional brush of his hand against my arm. When he adjusted his grip on the umbrella handle, the way he smelled, even damp from the rain, something clean and masculine, maybe his shampoo or cologne, cutting through the petrichor scent of the storm. We fell into a comfortable silence as we walked, both of us concentrating on staying upright on the slippery sidewalk and keeping our precarious shelter intact. The city around us had taken on a dreamlike quality in the storm, familiar landmarks rendered strange and mysterious by the gray curtain of rain. Cars moved slowly down the flooded streets, their headlights creating long ribbons of light in the gathering dusk. Neon signs from restaurants and shops bled color into the wet air, painting everything in soft purples and blues and greens. I found myself stealing glances at Alex as we walked. The storm had pushed us close enough that I could study his profile without being obvious about it. The straight line of his nose, the way his damp hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the concentration in his expression as he tried to keep us both dry. There was something compelling about the way he moved, a kind of unconscious grace that made me wonder what he did for a living, whether he was a dancer or an athlete or just someone who was naturally comfortable in his own skin. It was somewhere around the third block that I realized what he was doing. At first, I thought it was just the wind pushing the umbrella around, making it tilt and shift as we walked. But as I paid closer attention, I noticed that Alex was deliberately angling it toward me, sacrificing his own coverage to make sure I stayed as dry as possible. The right side of his gray sweater was getting steadily more soaked, darker and darker, as the rain found its way past the umbrella's protection. His hair on that side was dripping more heavily, sending little streams of water down his neck and disappearing under his collar. But he didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he didn't care. I wanted to say something to point out what he was doing, but something held me back. Maybe it was the kindness of the gesture, the quiet generosity of it, or maybe it was the way it made me feel, protected, cared for by someone who didn't even know me, who had no reason to put my comfort above his own. Instead, I found myself moving slightly closer to him, trying to share more of the umbrella's coverage without making it obvious what I was doing. Our arms were pressed together now from shoulder to elbow, and I could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, could sense the tension in his muscles as he fought to keep the umbrella stable against the gusting wind. The rain seemed to be getting heavier, if that was possible, drumming against the umbrella fabric with increasing intensity. The streets were properly flooded now, the water deep enough to splash over our shoes with each step and soak through to our socks. I could feel my feet getting colder and more uncomfortable with each block, but somehow I didn't mind it as much as I should have. We passed other people taking shelter in doorways and under building overhangs, all of us refugees from the storm. A woman in a bright red coat stood pressed against a restaurant window, talking animatedly on her phone. Two teenagers shared what looked like a jacket held over their heads, laughing as they ran from one awning to the next. An elderly man stood in a bus stop, checking his watch repeatedly and looking like he was beginning to doubt whether public transportation was going to be an option today. The whole city felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass. Alex and I were finding our rhythm now, our steps naturally synchronizing as we learned to navigate the flooded sidewalks together. He was a considerate walking partner, pausing when I needed to step around a particularly large puddle, adjusting his pace when my shorter stride made it hard to keep up. When we reached intersections, he would stop and wait for me to judge the depth of the water before we attempted to cross, both of us lifting our feet higher and trying to avoid the worst of the rushing water in the gutters. "This is insane," I said during one of these pauses, raising my voice slightly to be heard over the rain. We were standing at the corner of 5th and University watching cars inch through water that came halfway up their tires. Alex grinned, and I realized it was the first time I'd seen him look genuinely happy since we'd met, not just polite or amused, but actually happy. "I don't know," he said. "There's something kind of exhilarating about it, don't you think? Like the whole world is being washed clean." I looked at him more closely, trying to figure out if he was serious. Most people would have been complaining by now, cursing the weather and their luck and the inadequacy of the umbrella we were sharing. But Alex looked almost energized by the storm, his eyes bright and his expression animated despite the water dripping from his hair. "You're one of those people who actually likes bad weather, aren't you?" I asked. "Guilty as charged," he admitted. "I know it's weird. Most people think I'm crazy when I tell them that storms are my favorite kind of weather. But there's something about them that makes everything feel more, I don't know, more real somehow, like all the usual rules are suspended and anything could happen." As if to underscore his point, a particularly dramatic flash of lightning illuminated the entire street for a split second, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to shake the ground under our feet. The timing was so perfect that we both started laughing, the kind of helpless laughter that comes when the universe seems to be playing along with your private jokes. But the lightning had been close, really close, and I felt Alex stiffen beside me, his laughter cutting off abruptly. When I looked over, his face had gone pale, and his grip on the umbrella handle had tightened until his knuckles were white. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded quickly, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept darting upward as if he was tracking the storm's movements. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just lightning makes me nervous. Stupid, I know, especially for someone who claims to love storms." Another flash lit up the sky, this one even brighter than the last, followed by thunder that seemed to come from directly overhead. This time Alex actually flinched, a full-body jerk that sent the umbrella wobbling dangerously. Without thinking, I reached out to steady him, my hand landing on his forearm. "Hey, it's okay," I said. "We're almost there, right? Just another block or two?" But even as I said it, another bolt of lightning split the sky, and this one was different, closer, brighter, with a sharp electric crack that made the hair on my arms stand up. The thunder that followed was immediate and deafening, and I felt Alex jump like he'd been shocked. This time, instead of just flinching, his free hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The contact was sudden and unexpected, his fingers wrapping around my wrist with surprising strength. His hand was cold from the rain, but his grip was warm, almost burning against my chilled skin. I could feel his pulse through his fingertips, fast and unsteady, and when I looked up, I found him staring directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The moment stretched between us, lasting longer than it should have, longer than was comfortable or normal or easily explained. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated in a way that had nothing to do with the storm's dim light. I could see water droplets caught in his eyelashes, could count the freckles scattered across his nose, could feel the rapid flutter of his pulse where his thumb pressed against the inside of my wrist. Around us, the storm continued its assault on the city, but it felt suddenly distant, muffled, like we were standing in a bubble that held only the two of us and this strange charged moment that had emerged from nowhere and now seemed too important to break. His grip on my wrist hadn't loosened. If anything, his fingers had tightened slightly, and I could feel each individual point of contact like tiny points of heat against my skin. Neither of us was speaking, but there was something in the air between us that felt like conversation, like we were communicating in a language that didn't require words. The rain continued to fall around us, drumming against the umbrella and sending streams of water cascading off its edges. Lightning flickered in the distance, but Alex didn't seem to notice it anymore. His attention was completely focused on me, on the point where his hand connected with my wrist, on whatever was passing between us In that moment of unexpected intimacy, I realized I was holding my breath. Part 2. The spell broke when a car honked somewhere behind us, the sound cutting through our suspended moment like a knife through silk. Alex blinked, seeming to suddenly realize where he was and what he was doing, and his hand dropped from my wrist so quickly you'd have thought I was on fire. Sorry, he said, his voice rougher than it had been before. Lightning makes me jumpy. I didn't mean to. It's fine, I said quickly, though the place where his fingers had been was still tingling. Really? But it wasn't fine, not exactly. Something had shifted between us in that moment. Some invisible line had been crossed, and now we were both acutely aware of it, even as we pretended nothing had happened. The air felt charged in a way that had nothing to do with the storm, and every accidental brush of our bodies as we resumed walking sent little electric shocks through me. We walked in silence for another half block, the only sounds the drumming of rain against our shared umbrella and the splash of our feet through the flooded sidewalk. The quiet felt different now, not comfortable like it had been before, but loaded with everything we weren't saying. I kept stealing glances at Alex, trying to read his expression, but his face had gone carefully neutral, like he was working hard not to let anything show. It was Alex who finally broke the silence, his voice determinedly casual. So, what had you out in this weather anyway? Please don't tell me you're one of those people who actually checks the forecast. I laughed despite myself, grateful for the return to lighter territory. Guilty as charged. Well, sort of. I checked it. I just didn't believe it. The app said light rain, and I figured I could make it home before anything serious started. Famous last words, Alex said, grinning. The expression transformed his face, chasing away the careful neutrality and making him look younger, more relaxed. I don't even have that excuse. I knew it was going to be bad. I don't know, I thought I could outrun it. From where? Job interview, he admitted, and I could hear a note of embarrassment in his voice. At the university library, reference librarian position. I've been unemployed for about 3 months now, so when they called yesterday and said they had a last-minute opening for today, I jumped at it even though I knew the weather was going to be terrible. I looked at him with new interest. How'd it go? Better than I expected, actually. Worse than I hoped. He shrugged, sending droplets of water flying from his soaked sweater. You know how it is. They seem to like me, but there are probably 20 other people interviewing for the same job. All of them with better credentials and less this. He gestured vaguely at his storm-drenched appearance. I don't know, I said, meaning it. If I were hiring someone, I think I'd be impressed by someone who showed up in weather like this. Shows dedication. Or poor judgment, Alex said, but he was smiling again. Maybe both. The best kind of people usually have a little of each. He glanced over at me, and for a moment I thought I saw something warm flicker in his expression. What about you? What dragged you out into the apocalypse? Work meeting that ran late. I'm a graphic designer, and we had this client who couldn't make up their mind about their logo. 3 hours of make it more purple, and can we try a different font, and what if we added a butterfly? By the time we finished, I was so eager to get out of there that I didn't even look outside. A butterfly? Alex asked, raising an eyebrow. Don't ask. Corporate logo for a law firm, and they wanted to add a butterfly. I'm still trying to figure out the connection. Alex laughed, a real laugh this time, not the nervous chuckle from earlier. The sound made something warm unfurl in my chest, and I found myself smiling in response, even though the joke wasn't that funny. We were getting close to the university district now, the familiar landmarks becoming visible through the gray curtain of rain. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, the wind picking up and sending the rain at even more dramatic angles. Our little umbrella was struggling against the gusts, and Alex had to grip the handle with both hands to keep it from being torn away. The increased wind meant we had to stand even closer together to stay under what protection the umbrella offered. My left side was pressed against Alex's right from shoulder to hip now, and I could feel the warmth of his body even through our wet clothes. Every few steps, his free hand would brush against my arm as he fought to keep our shelter stable, and each contact sent little jolts of awareness through me. "This is ridiculous," Alex muttered as a particularly strong gust nearly turned the umbrella inside out. He wrestled it back under control, but the effort left us both laughing at the absurdity of our situation. "I feel like we're in some kind of slapstick comedy," I said, grabbing onto Alex's arm to steady myself as we navigated around a particularly large puddle. Two idiots and an umbrella versus the storm of the century. "This is the most awkward first date I've ever been on," Alex said, grinning as he said it, but there was something in his voice that made me look at him more closely. "Who said it was a date?" I replied, trying to match his light tone, but I could feel heat creeping up my neck despite the cold rain. Alex's grin widened. "Well, we're sharing an umbrella, walking home together in romantic weather, and I'm pretty sure I've told you more about my employment situation than I told my mother. If it's not a date, it's at least date adjacent." "Date adjacent," I repeated, tasting the words. I like that. Very modern, very undefined. Exactly, all the awkwardness of a first date with none of the pressure. But even as he said it, I could feel the pressure building between us, the weight of unspoken possibilities and the strange intimacy of being pressed together under our tiny shelter while the world dissolved around us. The storm had created its own universe, one that contained only the two of us and the small circle of dry space we shared. And in that universe, the normal rules didn't seem to apply. We turned onto University Avenue and I realized we were less than 3 blocks from my apartment. The knowledge should have been a relief. Soon I'd be dry and warm and safe from the storm. But instead it felt like a countdown to the end of something I wasn't ready to finish. "Which way?" Alex asked when we reached the intersection with Elm Street. "Left," I said, pointing toward the tree-lined street that led to my neighborhood. "Just a couple more blocks." Alex nodded and adjusted our course, but as we walked I noticed he was angling the umbrella even more dramatically toward me, leaving his right shoulder and arm completely exposed to the rain. His sweater was soaked through now, clinging to his frame and making him look smaller and more vulnerable than he had in the shop. "You're getting drenched," I said, trying to shift closer to him to share more of the umbrella's protection. "I'm fine," he said, but I could see him shivering slightly. "No, you're not. Here, let me..." I reached for the umbrella handle, trying to take it from him or at least share the burden of holding it. "David." The way he said my name stopped me mid-reach. It was gentle but firm, and there was something in his voice that made me look up at his face. "I'm fine. Really, we're almost there, right?" There was something in his expression that I couldn't quite read, a determination mixed with something softer, something that made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He was doing this on purpose, I realized, the umbrella tilting, the way he kept positioning himself to shield me from the worst of the rain. It wasn't accidental or unconscious. It was deliberate, careful, kind. I wanted to argue, to insist that we share the protection equally, but something in his face told me that this mattered to him in a way I didn't fully understand, so I let him do it, let him keep me dry while he got soaked, and tried to ignore the way it made me feel, protected and cared for, and something else I wasn't quite ready to name. We reached my street as the storm reached what felt like its peak intensity. The rain was coming down so hard now that it bounced off the pavement, creating a fine mist that rose up around our ankles. Lightning was flickering almost continuously in the distance, and the thunder had become a constant low rumble, like the city was sitting on top of a giant stomach. "This is me," I said when we reached the brick apartment building where I lived. It was a converted townhouse, 3 stories with narrow windows and a small covered entryway that suddenly looked like the most welcoming sight in the world. But Alex didn't stop walking. Instead, he guided us up the front path under the small overhang that provided the first real shelter we'd had since leaving the shop. "You didn't have to walk me all the way to the door," I said, though I was grateful he had. The extra 30 feet of coverage had probably saved me from being completely soaked through. "Of course I did," Alex said, as if any other option would have been unthinkable. "What kind of date-adjacent encounter would it be if I didn't see you safely home?" We stood there under the small overhang, both of us dripping onto the concrete steps, neither of us making any move toward the door. The umbrella hung between us, forgotten now that we had real shelter, but Alex's hand was still wrapped around the handle like he was reluctant to let it go. I should have been fumbling for my keys, should have been eager to get inside and out of my wet clothes, but I found myself stalling, not ready for this strange, unexpected encounter to end. There was something about Alex that made me want to keep talking, keep standing close to him, keep existing in this weird bubble of intimacy that the storm had created around us. "So," I said, not sure what was going to come out of my mouth next. "Library science, huh?" Alex grinned. I know. Most people think it's the most boring job in the world, but I love it actually. There's something about helping people find exactly what they're looking for, even when they don't know what that is yet. "That doesn't sound boring at all," I said, and meant it. It sounds, I don't know, important, necessary. "Yeah?" He looked pleased, like my opinion mattered to him somehow. Most people just make jokes about shushing and late fees. Most people don't know what they're talking about. We fell quiet again, but it was a comfortable quiet this time, charged with possibility rather than awkwardness. Alex was standing close enough that I could see the water droplets caught in his eyelashes, could count the freckles scattered across his cheekbones. His hair was starting to curl as it dried, and I found myself wondering what would feel like to run my fingers through it. I gestured vaguely toward my front door. "Yeah, of course," Alex said quickly. "You must be freezing, and I should probably get home too before this gets any worse." But neither of us moved. We stood there looking at each other, both of us aware that once I went inside, this moment would be over. Whatever this was, this strange connection, this unexpected intimacy, would become just a story we told about getting caught in a storm. "The umbrella," I said suddenly, reaching for it. "You should take it. You've still got to get home." But Alex shook his head, pressing the handle firmly into my palm. "Keep it. I only live a few more blocks, and I'm already soaked through anyway. Besides, He paused, and I saw something flicker across his face, some decision being made. Maybe you could let me borrow it next time. The words hung between us, loaded with implication. Next time. As if he was already planning to see me again, as if this wasn't just a random encounter that would fade into memory. Next time, I repeated, my voice carefully neutral even as my heart did something complicated in my chest. Well, Alex said, and that nervous laugh was back, the one from when we'd first met. It seems like the kind of umbrella that might need returning. Eventually, when the storm passes, I looked down at the umbrella in my hands. Cheap, black, nothing special except for the fact that it had brought us together. I guess it does, I said. Need returning, I mean. Alex smiled, and it was different from his other smiles, warmer, more genuine, touched with something that might have been hope. Good. That's good. I fumbled for my keys, suddenly aware that we were both still standing there, dripping and shivering, that the moment was stretching out longer than it should have. My hands were shaking slightly, whether from cold or nerves I couldn't tell, and it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. David, Alex said just as I got the door open. I turned back to look at him, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something important, something that would change the entire trajectory of whatever was happening between us. But instead he just smiled again, smaller this time, more uncertain. Be careful with that umbrella, he said. It's had an eventful day. I will, I promised, and somehow it felt like I was promising more than just to take care of a $12 umbrella from a corner shop. I stepped inside into the warmth and dryness of my apartment building's hallway and turned to close the door. Alex was still standing there under the small overhang, rain dripping from his hair, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Get home safe, I said. I will. See you next time, David. The door clicked shut between us, and I was alone in the quiet hallway listening to my own breathing and the muffled sound of the storm outside. I stood there for a long moment, the umbrella dripping in my hand, trying to process what had just happened. Through the glass panel beside the door, I could see Alex's silhouette as he stepped back out into the rain, his figure becoming indistinct almost immediately in the gray torrent. I watched until he disappeared completely, swallowed up by the storm, and then I was left with just the umbrella and the lingering scent of rain and something else, his cologne maybe, or just the particular smell of him that I'd been breathing in for the past 6 blocks. I climbed the stairs to my 3rd-floor apartment slowly, still carrying the umbrella, still feeling the ghost of Alex's presence beside me. My clothes were plastered to my skin, my shoes squelching with each step, but I barely noticed. My mind was replaying every moment of our walk. The way he'd laughed at my butterfly logo story, the careful way he'd kept the umbrella tilted toward me, the moment when his hand had grabbed my wrist and everything had changed. Inside my apartment, I set the umbrella by the door and stood there looking at it. It was just an umbrella, cheap, mass-produced, the kind of thing you'd throw away without thinking twice. But as I stared at it, watching the water drip from its black fabric onto my hardwood floor, I realized Alex was right. It wasn't just an umbrella, it was a beginning.